Um, we'll just give a few moments for people to trickle in. How are you this morning, afternoon, Emily? What time is it? Time is an illusion.
Yes, 4 o'clock here. And I got my second shot today, as you know.
Yes.
So far, so good.
I
And
just
I have a long list of experiences from everybody else that I am abiding by. So,
there you
how are
go.
you?
I am doing well. It is a beautiful sunny day. It's 3 o'clock or so where I am. If anyone's tuning in from the Chicagoland area, I'm new to your city, here to make friends. Uh, yeah. Um, so yeah, it's good in my mostly still vacant apartment. So as some of you may notice, it's quite resident in here sound wise.
You just need a carpet and 8 more pieces of furniture.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the bookshelf and frame is the one piece of furniture I have in addition to the chair that I am sitting on.
And if I had a bookcase behind me, this is what I would put on it. Just my copy of Kevin's new book.
That's so lovely.
Please come off book.
With the plug. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So hi y'all in the interweb sphere. We're super excited to have y'all today. Before anything else, though, nice to meet you. My name is Kevin Kantor. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm currently coming to you from the unceded land of the Kickapoo people, also called Chicago, Illinois. I am an actor, a writer, and a poet. I have worked primarily in regional theater at companies such as the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, Arizona Theater Company, the B Street Theater, Actors Theater of Louisville. I worked as a survivorship consultant on the second season of John Ridley's ABC drama American Crime, and I am the author of Please Come Off Book, a full-length collection of poetry. Yes, there it is. That uses the film, theater, and television industries as an extended lens of exploration into trans non-binary identity, the semiotics of gender on stage and in performance, and growing up queer. That is who I am. Who are you?
Wonderful. Thanks, Kevin. Hi, I'm Emily Tarquin. I use they, them, theirs, and I am Zooming today from the unceded land of the Osage people, colonially known as Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the artistic producer of Actors Theater of Louisville, and also a CSA casting director. And also, I know we want to thank Backstage and Ring of Keys for hosting us today, giving us this opportunity to gather with this amazing group of people. And before we bring everybody on, we also wanted to thank you all for being so active in the chat already. And we want to get to know you a little bit better. So we're going to put up a poll. If you would all take a minute to click through just to sort of see who's joining us today.
Yes. Let me see here. Has that happened? Technology.
Christine, is it possible to put the poll up?
As we wait for that
Okay,
poll.
wait, I think I'm doing it.
Oh, wonderful. Great. And oh, there it is. Lovely. So, of course, at your leisure, please click into this poll. There are 3 questions. We want to have just an idea of who's joining us today, so we can maybe gear some of our points of discussion to best cater attendees here. And as you click through that, I wanted to acknowledge the abundance of queer, trans, and gender nonconforming, and the expansiveness of sexuality and gender in our community, and that the panel today only represents a fraction of that expansiveness. This community and the individuals within it are by no means a monolith, and we can only be speaking from our own personal perspectives and experiences. And I'm incredibly grateful to those that are sharing time and space with us today to lend us those individual perspectives and experiences.
Yes, when we all met last week to start this conversation, I was reminded that a panel is really a form of consultancy, and just imagining sort of what and what we hope to instill is what consultancy and a multitude of voices can bring to a creative process.
And we also want this to be a space in which people feel as if they're able to walk away with actionable ways to better show up, represent, and lift up the queer and gender expansive communities, specifically in the arts and beyond. And so everything that we share today is an encouragement of active allyship, right? We want to be able to share resources, but not feel as if the end goal is for us to be checking boxes as a means to show up for the community, because as we know here, that's not enough. It's not really doing the work, and isn't serving the community as much as active allyship can. So we invite engagement in the chat. There will be a dedicated time at the end for a Q&A period, and questions and comments will be will be passed along to the panelists, and if it is organic for us to answer in the moment, we will, but know that there will be a Q&A period at the end of our panel.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, let's bring all the panelists on and do a round of introductions.
Let's.
Great.
Christine.
Hi, guys. I'm Christine McKenna-Tirella. My pronouns are she, her. I am on Lenape territory in New Jersey. I am originally from Northern Ireland, which before colonization, I'm from outside Belfast, which is Belfirsta in Irish, in the county of Andoon. And I'm a casting director with 10 years experience. I work in theatre primarily, and I also am a consultant here at Backstage. I work on the casting team and the content team, and I'm really humbled to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christine. All right, TS.
Hello and good afternoon, early evening. Yes, okay, one of those. My name is T.S. Hawkins. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am on the territory of Lenape, just in Philadelphia. And I come to this space today as a playwright, producer, and education director for Theater Exile. And I'm just honored to be in this space and share this conversation with each and every one of you. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, TS. Next, let's bring on Michelle.
Hello. My name is Michelle Mary Schaefer. I'm an actor. I'm also deaf. I'm also a writer, a producer, and like I said, a director as well. On the East Coast, I represent really everything what it embodies to be an actress, and also I use sign language interpreters, of course, as you can see through Darius and Candace. So the deaf and hard of hearing community is truly at the center of my heart.
Wonderful. All right, Miss Hazel.
Hello there, my name is Miss Hazel Jade. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm currently in Dallas, Texas, land of the Kickapoo people. I'm an independent dramaturg, Broadway investor, off-Broadway creative producer, and most recently I am the director of a brand new folk musical written by a trans guy, starring a trans guy and a Black queer woman, and featuring a non-binary person. So I'm quite excited to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miss Hazel. And Charlie.
Hi, folks. My name is Charlie Hano. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm on the land of the Lenape people, colonized under the name the Upper West Side. and I am a casting director. I'm the in-house casting director at Musical Theater Factory. I was the assistant on the original off-Broadway production of Slave Play. Last year, I received an incredible blessing, and I cast this production of Mud at Mabou Mines that won the Obie Award for Best Director. And although we were all on YouTube and it was strange, it was a blessing and a half. And recently I was a consultant on the TV show Work in Progress. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me in this space.
Thanks, Charlie. Josie.
Oh, if I can unmute. Hi, I'm Josie Kearns. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am on the land of the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, and the Odawa in Chicago. And I am super excited to be here. I'm a gender consultant and a dramaturg. I mostly focus on workshops, new works, helping create new works about queer and trans topics specifically in the theater. So a little bit all over the country. I've done a lot in Seattle, a lot in New York, a little bit in Chicago, a few other places, but excited to be here today.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Sushma.
Hi y'all, good day or good evening wherever you are. My name is Sushma Saha. I use any and all pronouns, so she, her, he, him, they, them, Caesar. I'm on the land of the Susquehannock, also known as Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I am an actor, singer, dancer, voice actor, and model. Some of my credits, mainly theater, are New York Musical Workshop, Actors Theater of Louisville, and Mixed Blood Theater. And I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for having me. Oh, I'm also about to graduate from Ithaca College with a degree in musical theater. So yeah, finishing up finals this week. Happy to be here with all of you.
Yes, graduating. All right. Okay, I think what's going to happen now is I'm going to close the poll and we're all going to see it, but I'm going to say it's like it's a pretty good mix here.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll see it.
Are you seeing it now?
Oh, yeah, I believe so. Yes. So,
okay, great.
Yes, a really good breakdown of creatives here in this space across many mediums, primarily theater and film. But we also have some commercial folks here, some folks who are other, and I always love the other option. And a really wonderful breakdown of queer folk and also folks who are here to learn how to better and support learn how to better support that community. Great.
Okay, that's great. All right, taking those down. Wonderful. Thank you all. So just for all the folks joining us, we are going to have a dedicated Q&A time that we'll be on the lookout to make sure we're holding enough time for that. But to start, we just had some areas, some topics that when we came together, we just felt were the areas we wanted to discuss as a group here. And so maybe I'll just kick off sort of like the first one and we can go from there. And just a reminder for me included to just put a hand up for our panelists and restate your name when you're sharing. Okay, great. So first up is the huge topic of an ideal process as we think about rooms that we've been in, that we want to be in, work, as Miss Hazel Jade just gave an amazing example of, that involves the queer, TGNC, transgender nonconforming community. Who might kick that off?
I know, dipping our toes in the water. Oh, I see Miss Hazel is unmuted.
I guess I will go first. For me, when I am conceiving a piece or preparing to direct a piece, now that I am fully heading into directing, I first want to take a look at the material. As a Black woman, as a bisexual woman, I like directing pieces that are very fucking queer. And I love having my team look at them as well. I have an entire team of queer folks, from my newest collaborator, Will Shish. He himself is a trans guy, so he can bring in his experience. Sometimes I have my MD Anessa look at things. My dramaturg Pascal will look at things. Anessa's a trans woman, Pascal's a cis Black woman. She's also a gay woman, so she can add that perspective. And then I have a company music overseer, Amanda Racken, who looks at things. And sometimes I will consult my lighting designer, who comes to me with a lot of projects that he wants to conceive himself. He also goes by they, them pronouns. He is a non-binary person. So I kind of like to make sure that I have all bases covered. But the first thing is it has to be gay as hell for me.
TS, everyone, hello. I have a duality in my life. As a playwright and producer, I often have to produce my own work, and it's always Black and it's always queer. And so I get to say who's in the room, and it's always Black queer people. That's it, Black queer people all day. When I'm working in predominantly white spaces or predominantly cis spaces, then it's like, I try to advocate for as many queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people as possible to be in the space, to have that voice. And not particularly just because it may be a queer identified show. Those voices just need to be in the room, period. So I do my best to make sure all the rooms that I'm in are as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, for me as a gender consultant, I work on a lot of shows that are conceived and directed by cis people, less and less over time, which is becoming, which I'm appreciating. But when I do get into those rooms, for me, the first step is always to make sure that they, really before I get into those rooms, before I sign a contract, I always make sure that they don't think that I am representing the entire trans community, that they're just like bringing me in to be the gender person and everybody else is cis. That's not a space that I want to be in, and it's ultimately not, I can't represent the entire community. So a lot of it is just about how many different people can we get in the room in every position possible, and especially in leadership positions. And then once we have that, we kind of have a jumping off point. And so I'll be the person in the room who's always thinking about gender, but not the only one with queer and trans experience to be able to bring that to the show.
Something that I just wanted Kevin to pin before the next person hops in is the number of queer folk that Miss Hazel Jade was able to name as part of that team, and how it sort of speaks to the myth that is scarcity of qualified queer people in several roles throughout this industry. The myth that we often hear, that they were unable to find a queer person, a trans person in any given field who is qualified. And you named so many folks in that 30 seconds. So I just wanted to pin that.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, I think it's important to have multiple queer voices, diverse queer voices, on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity specifically, on the basis of gender, both gender identity as well as gender experience, and also sexual orientation versus sexuality. I'm sorry, because there are some of us that are queer, and then there are some of us that are asexual, and yet we have a romantic identity as well. And I like shows that explore all of those.
I'd like to add, if I might, this is Michelle speaking. Really, I'm really grateful to hear all of the comments where it talks about trans individuals, BIPOC, having culture, a multi-diversity in which makes up a company or production is great. And the same thing needs to be said when it talks about characters, making sure that representation is there, because representation really matters. Individuals are creative. We are our own creative beings. So in order for us to be authentic and cherished and appreciated, We need and to be all in our work, whether it's a stage design or a script work, whether it's a web series, we really need to just focus on ourselves. And there needs to be true authenticity. I don't know if you all have heard of the web series called Real. Representation truly does matter. And it's written by someone who is deaf. So empowering individuals and peoples as a whole, having allies and partnerships really are important. And to be honest, there are some things that I don't know about the trans community. But the thing is that I want to respect them and I will ask. Same thing goes for Black individuals, for those that are BIPOC. I have no fear asking, so that way I don't come to any false conclusions. You know, it's the same thing about trans and how that sign even came about, and that means coming to bloom. And that's something that I truly appreciate. And thank you so much for the panelists here and those attendees. I look forward to many positive things that, of course, happen on screen as well as on stage. So thank you so much. That's an interpreter. If the interpreter needs a water break, was I signing too fast? No, you're good.
Well, and Kevin, you were going to jump in.
Oh yeah, I wanted to, because Josie brought up the role of gender consultant, and I wanted to take a moment to maybe discuss a little bit about what that is in particular, what you're able to provide to any given production, whether or not that production maybe centers a trans narrative. And I think that also that'd be a great opportunity for perhaps Charlie to discuss your role in casting, and you know, the sort of the breadth and wealth of ways in which we can support the community beyond just, you know, trans actors playing trans roles, because we know that, well, we here know that that should be a given.
Thank you so much for that lead in, Kevin. Every single actor I know from a historically marginalized identity is exhausted of only being allowed to talk about their identity when they make art. There's a lot of really wonderful art that can take on very specific topics where we really want to get into the nitty-gritty and make art for that and provide community with catharsis. And unfortunately, some of that just becomes sort of lectures and now a very special episode. At the end of the day, I've never heard a convincing argument for why a role that was written for a cis white person should not be played by literally anyone else. Maybe that argument exists. I've yet to hear it. I think actors are in an incredibly difficult position. There's the fear of being pigeonholed. There's the fear of talking yourself out of work. I'm a big believer in actors having what I call two resumes, the disclosure resume and the non-disclosure resume. You have your non-disclosure resume for when you go in for commercial work, when you want to appear as marketable and safe and sort of just as broad as possible. And then you have your resume for when you're going in for the thing that you know was written for you, and you want the people behind the table to know that it was written for you, where you get into specifics about what genders you feel comfortable playing, what your pronouns are, anything you want to tell us about your heritage. Because at the end of the day, casting is not allowed to ask certain questions legally. It is meant for the protection for actors. What it actually means is you have people like me, you have casting directors spending a lot of time Googling. We are on your Instagram looking for pictures of you just living your life, you with your parents, you with your partners. And we're all doing that at every single level, at every kind of production. I hope I have not quite lost the thread of this. I do feel like it is very important to say, because I know this, and we all know this, if you're looking for an actor from a community, you can find them. You need the time, you need money, you need people that know what they're doing, but you can absolutely find them no matter who they are. And that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And just to second something that Michelle Mary said earlier, also the bit about representation, I always like to frame representation as not just showing roles, and not just having roles that match our identity, but having roles that match our identity that aren't about the trauma of having our identity, right? That's a problem for every marginalized group. That's not limited. Like my main focus is queer and trans folks, but that's certainly not limited to them. And part of that, Kevin, to get to your original question, so I called myself a gender consultant. There are lots of different kinds of consultants. There are cultural consultants that work on shows about BIPOC folks. There are, and any other ethnic group you can imagine, there are folks who consult on shows that deal with specific languages, specific topics, specific religions, disability, you name it. And what broadly, all of us define the role a little bit differently, but broadly what we're there for, the argument that I always make for the role is that if you bring trans actors in to play trans roles, great, that's a great start. If you have more trans people on the team, that's also great. None of those people are being paid to educate the cis people in the room on top of the job that they were hired to do. And so the reason you have a consultant for that role is to come in and do all of the work, so have someone who is paid to do the emotional labor, to do all of the work that would normally get dumped on everybody else, whether the company intends to or not, right? So I do education sessions for the entire cast, crew, company, team, et cetera. I'm in rehearsals, partly as a script consultant, partly to assist the director, partly as a sort of intimacy. I don't choreograph physical intimacy, but I do look out for actors' well-being in similar ways, especially because trans characters are so often portraying really personal traumas. I work with marketing and PR on their language. I work with front of house to make sure that the space is as welcoming for patrons. Education, I often write content. It's just sort of wherever we need that voice. And again, like, it's not just my voice, but at the end of the day, when they need someone to do that sort of emotional heavy lifting, that's what I'm there for. That's what I get paid to do.
I would, Christine here, I'd love to just kind of build on something that Charlie was saying and that Josie was just saying there. Here's a call to action. Here's a way of kind of a way in which we are trying to fix things here at Backstage. So we recently we expanded our gender identities to past female, male, and transgender, which is what we had before, and added 23 additional identifiers so that you can truly express yourself on the site, right? And what we want you can actually write in your own if there's something that we're missing there. And why that's important is because casting directors, when they are looking to be authentic with their casting, they want to be able to find you, and we want you to be able to be found. And most importantly, because Backstage has such a platform, and because we are often the first site that an actor lands on when they are planning their careers, we want you to know that you are welcome and that you are included and that you have a place here, right? So like that importance. And secondly, there's two sides to that coin about kind of that disclosure, right? Like that's your choice. That's your identity, right? We want you to be comfortable. We want you to do that because casting truly wants to find you. And otherwise, yeah, we do get our like binoculars out and start looking at your Instagram and every way that we possibly can to find out your true identity when we're looking in that direction. On the other side, the flip side of that, what we've done, and I want other casting sites to join us in this. Our first default is all genders, right? All genders is what when you create a breakdown with us, all genders and all ethnicities. You have to decide to opt in to start filtering through. And of course, there are projects where you need particular things, right? That's why, again, identity is important, and being able to identify is important. But it's also important that all genders, just as all ethnicities, for most projects should be the way that we're going, but that's not what's reflected on the screens, and that's not reflected in the decisions that get made in casting places. And we see it on the screen, right? Just look to the UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report every year, right? Like, so there's work to be done. So we have to start with from a place of all genders. So it should be able to be, unless it's script driven, unless it is project like driven, people that are all genders means male, female, also the transgender and non-binary, because we should be looking at it that way. I hope I rounded that out right to make sense.
I have something to say.
Michelle.
Michelle? I would like to also add about the comments in regards to identity. That is something that is totally understood and needed. But at the same time, sometimes identities can be limiting. For example, myself, I'm deaf. Clearly, I have sign language interpreters today. But in society, those that view me, they view me as deaf, but only deaf. They only see me for deaf roles. Yes, for those roles, in order, you can have deaf and hard of hearing. Deaf should not be the only role or the only identification or to check off, as one says. Why can't it be deaf and hard of hearing? I encourage and I challenge directors to open their minds, not in their hearts and their eyes. I can look back and think that there was one play in particular. It wasn't a deaf role. However, the director told me that I could only be Sarah Newman in Children of a Lesser God. Me as an actor, I always start. I know diversity is important. Yes, of course. For example, I was in Hamlet. Does Hamlet have anyone deaf? No, they don't. Of course, it's a Shakespearean play, but I'm a woman who happens to be deaf. So that adds to my multi-identity and intersectionality of me. Often deaf in films and in shows and plays, they're not even thinking about deaf and hard of hearing individuals to be casted in certain roles. So that's why I urge and I challenge and I push back to really be more inclusive, to really open up your mind, hearts, and eyes, as I said, when it talks about just identifying oneself and how we might view someone, maybe not who they view themselves to be. Yes, I am Michelle Mary Schaefer. I am deaf, but deafness does not define me 100%. I, of course, love being deaf. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. However, people again and again continue to oppress me based and boxing me into these certain roles. And really, we need to change. We need to do better. So I challenge you all now, please open your mind. Maybe this can be one of the biggest takeaways from today. If you are a filmmaker or a playwright, please open up your mind.
Thank you, Michelle Mary, for that. Thank you very, very much. I also want to expand the lens, bring it out a little bit more. I think sometimes it gets easy to say, oh, like directors and playwrights, not creating the stories and including the vision. I know a lot of playwrights who open up vast, vast worlds. And sometimes it does come down to the production houses and the producers. They're the money people. And they are the ones who get to say, what gets done. I've watched some of my shows, be like, really? That's how we're going to enter this? Okay, cool. Yeah, and it sucks. It sucks. So there's a part of you that has to swallow what your story is about because you want it to be seen by different audiences. So I also offer too, it's the production houses like that, the things that we are asking for, the things that should be standard, now we have to demand them. They don't make the budget lines. And they will fight tooth and nail and tell you that it's not going to make the budget lines if they don't see the profit margin at the end of it. Because sometimes production houses are not looking at the people who are making the production happen. They're just looking at everything as part of one big product.
Thank you, TS. I mean, yes, so that there's many systems at play, right? We wanted to take a look into some of the questions that have been being submitted, and they cover a lot of topics. And I'm trying to maybe distill something that's central. Yes, so sort of riding this wave of the conversation, I wonder if anyone can speak to what we've sort of been talking about in regards to the way in which identity manifests in storytelling. And I mean, Charlie sort of touched on this, as did Michelle, this idea that there's a concern that when we allow our otherwise marginalized, the intersections of our marginalized identities to come to the forefront, that there is a question in regards to our marketability in what otherwise might be mainstream, right? That often in an industry that is very optics based, often casting directors or other folks rely on the body to do a lot of heavy lifting in regards to storytelling. That whiteness, cisness, and ability are often seen as the blank canvases with which to paint upon. And that being visibly queer, whatever that means, visibly non-white, all the way these, again, optics identities as they arise can make us less marketable. And I'm wondering if anyone can speak to how they've navigated those experiences, especially, I mean, I think Michelle spoke to it so eloquently in that we long to be more interesting than the most disenfranchised parts of ourselves, and to be able to tell all the stories. I know, Sushma, you are just coming out of a training program. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or anyone, feel free to jump in.
I mean, yeah, actually it's funny that we talk about this because just recently this past spring, I did a production of Head Over Heels, and there's that one non-binary character in it, Pythio. And it was very funny because I, at the time, was the only out non-binary person in my program. So it was very scary, but I did advocate for myself in that I was like, you know, I'm the only non-binary person who's out in my program right now. So I did have a meeting with the faculty and was like advocated to ask for the part, knowing that they really didn't have, that they were not they were stuck with me, but like that, like, but they picked the show because they knew that I was going to be coming back, so that they were able to have this representation. And that's both wonderful that they were trying to create more representation and have different voices and different experiences on stage, but then to also pigeonhole me in that was the only part that I could play in the season, because nobody else could fill the role. They had talked about because I actually would plan on opting out of the season because of, senior year is very busy. And they were talking about casting a cis person in that role if they didn't have anybody else. And that was really stressful. And I felt a pressure to opt back into the season because I felt that if I had not done that, then I would have been personally responsible for having lack of representation on stage. And all my directors were white. And it was very interesting, right? Because in terms of like costuming and stuff, like it was more that was because granted, yes, my directors were white, but like I had a very open and candid conversation with them about how I did not want to perpetuate any stereotypes, that I wanted my TGNC-ness to be like what it is and like valid enough for this part, even though it was written in a very specific way for the actor Peppermint, the drag queen Peppermint. And how I didn't want to perpetuate any of stereotypes of being a Black trans woman, because she is the person who played this role originally, and the role was written for her. I did feel like I owed, being an AFAB person, it was really interesting feeling like I owed them androgyny. And I didn't want that to be the case, but it is an inherent feeling in that, like the costumer wanted me to shave my head, which I did. Hello. And it was very hard in that, as a student, with all my faculty being in charge of this production, I had to do a lot of advocating for myself, but also seeing that I was also giving in to a lot of maybe some not stereotypes, but a lot of owed androgyny that I know that I didn't need to give them, but I felt like in some moments that I owed them because I was asking for too much as somebody who was already advocating for myself so heavily. I don't know if this is answering the question, but this is part of the experience that I experienced. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for, like, we need to just continue to tell people and encourage TGNC people and trans people and non-binary people that, like, you don't owe anybody a certain idea of what your definition of your identity is. Like, you don't owe certain haircuts, you don't owe certain jewelry styles, you don't owe tattoos, you don't owe anybody, like, you don't owe anybody anything of a certain version of what people associate androgyny with, or lack thereof of it, or like how feminine or how masculine you are, whatever that means. I hope that we can lean towards that so we can show more audiences that what we are is not like, is like what Kevin, I know Kevin last show said this in another panel about TGNC people, it's not a monolith. Like, it just simply is not. So.
Emily, thank you. Yeah, if the panelists haven't seen, I put a Google link in the chat because there's so many questions coming in. It might be easier to see. I also think, Sushma, that makes me think back to also TS, what you said of to zoom even farther out, the planning to even get to the place of choosing a play that has the one non-binary character in the program, that you're in. I wonder, there's a lot of questions about certainly setting up auditions for success. I'm also wondering about expanding a little bit on those sort of pre-production planning conversations, so that a lot of that is happening even in advance of that moment.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this one. I mean, one for me is just who's in the room, right? Like, most of the time, if you are trans, if you are queer, if you are Black, if you are any marginalized group, when you walk into a casting room, the people on the other side of the table do not look like you, literally not one of them. And that means a couple of things. One is that it means that, to get to what Sushma was just saying, it means that they're going to have a stereotyped idea in their head of what it's supposed to look like to cast someone in a particular identity. And that's going to be largely based on stereotypes because it's all that most of those people have. And the other thing that it means is that we can't then trust, the person who's auditioning can't even then trust that this is going to be handled appropriately, right? Like I get asked to sort of what you were saying, Emily, I get asked a lot by dramaturgs, literary managers, people like that, like, you know, when we're doing play selection, or not even that, they'll say like, at what point in the process should we bring in a gender consultant? And I always say to them, if you have already hit the point of no return, if you're already, if you've already decided to do this show, it's too late. Not that you still shouldn't do it if you have hit that point. I don't mean that, but like, it needs to be sooner than that. You need to involve people in the process, and not just in a tokenized way, but deeply involve people in the process who are part of the community that the show is about, or it's never going to be authentic.
I know that TS and Miss Hazel, I'm under the impression that you've done some professorial work amongst many other things. I'm wondering if you can speak to ways in which you have either worked to uphold the standard that Josie is talking about, or how others might be able to.
Yay. Okay. So like when I'm producing for myself, it is really it's a little easier. It's just easier. I know my work. I've decided to do my work. I know it's black and clear, and that's what I'm looking for on stage and behind the scenes. Like, so that's a no-brainer on that regard. When I'm producing for other institutions, that's where the hiccup begins. Just like Josie pointed out, it's like, oh, you know, like 2 days or so, or maybe, you know, give grace, like two weeks or so before the production. It then becomes, oh, should we bring so-and-so? Should we have this? Like they have their own standards. Like, yes, equity has already been involved. You know, we have the casting director, we talked to the playwright, we talked to marketing, we talked to development. And it's like, oh, yay, no one's thinking about the play and the humans involved until it's time to prepare for first rehearsal. And so being the voice in the room, trying to get people to acknowledge that there are some gaps in the standard process. I'm the company nuisance, and I am the company nuisance. It's like, oh, okay. And why are we thinking about this now? We need to pay this person. How are we going to adequately pay this person without taking something away from the costume budget or without bringing down the scenic design? How we should be thinking about this in the before. And every time I bring it up, it's like, oh yeah, we still get to this point. So to be honest, I'm still trying to find different ways instead of like dismantling all the theaters and burning them down because they're not listening. I'm really still trying to find ways to manifest to get folks to be more comfortable to think about being inclusive and clear and authentic from the very beginning.
I love that. Yes, I've gotten calls in the middle of tech rehearsals from shows. It's like, what? I mean, if all you want is a rubber stamp from me, that's all I can give you, and I'm not about to do that.
I love what they're both saying. I'll be very honest. I am someone who likes to come in as early as the development process. Literally on the page is when I love to come onto projects, both as a dramaturg, as a director. I love working with writers one-on-one as they start page one. The Regulars, the show that I'm working on right now, I think I came on page 32 to try to change the story somewhat. Yes, our writer is a white guy, but he is a white trans guy, or shall I say a white passing trans guy. With that comes a bit of a lack of understanding and yet a wanting to understand. And with that, for me, I have to make sure that I surround myself with folks who are going to be able to challenge me. My directing standpoint, as well as my producing standpoint, I go back to a quote that used to be in my grandmother's bathroom when I was a kid. And Robert F. Kennedy used to say, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I see things that never were and say why not." And I always go back to, why aren't we including trans people now? Or aren't we including deaf consultants and deaf performers on stage now? For me, about 2.5 years ago, I started losing hearing in my right ear. And my mother judges me whenever she's in my space where I have captions on for everything because I can barely hear. And so for me, I love when people who are producing things, or when I'm bringing on producers to a show that I'm directing or that I'm a dramaturg on or that I'm book writing for, ask me certain things up front. And I think that a lot of that comes from my two philosophies in producing are, you've got to be transparent, first of all, and you have to have an open line of communication. If I can't have a conversation with you, I don't want to work with you. If I feel like you're going to be challenging me at every step, one, I don't want to do the piece, but also secondly, I don't think you need to be doing the piece either. And so we all as folks, as performers, as creatives, as writers, need to make sure that we're having an active voice at the table. If not, then challenging why people are doing things.
Kevin.
Applause, Jade. Applause to Hazel, Jade. Yes, thank you for that.
What I wanted to, because again, this is something that I feel like we're on the precipice of addressing, is earlier on, we sort of dispelled the myth of scarcity in regards to trans, queer, and otherwise marginalized talent. But what we do know is that there is a scarcity in regards to the stories of those folks being told. And so often, in order for us to work, we find ourselves, hopefully, to Michelle's point, to Ms. Hazel's point, to several folks today, engaging in work and telling stories that maybe doesn't center the facet of our identity that is traditionally disenfranchised. Trans folks playing cis folks, casting folks with disabilities in roles that were not traditionally cast as such. So when we find ourselves in those positions, because A, we want more of it, and B, it needs to happen in order for us to work, how can folks best support us then, when it does not feel as if the focus is on our transness, our disability, our queerness, because it's not necessarily in a production that is centering those stories, but we're there. How can they best support us then? Anyone?
Would you mind reframing that again for me?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we are working on projects that don't necessarily center a narrative having to do with queerness, transness, disability, but we are obviously arriving to those projects with those identities, how can institutions, producers best support us? Because it does not necessarily feel like the focus is going to be on that, because that's not the story we are telling, if that makes sense.
Michelle, go ahead.
Okay. Well, for me, to, of course, I don't want to take the spotlight away from deaf individuals, and we don't want to do that when it happens in the script as well. Sometimes I do include my deafness and my deaf experience into the script, and I do put it down sometimes. If, say, for example, I was in a car to go to I don't know, to a restaurant. Just focusing on a human connection if I'm in a car, I'm going to a restaurant, let's just say. Do you see me as a deaf person? No, you see me as human. A person who's going to a restaurant. We don't see my story, the full story. You're looking at it from just one lens. Instead, we need to look at it from a human lens. Everything has layers, just like an onion. And that's what we would, of course, we would challenge others to do. But I'm really, really interested to hear what the other panelists have to say. Ms. Hazel, Jade?
I want to build off of that, but not speaking for Michelle Mary, but I remember when I first came out as bisexual to my mother, and especially to my great-grandmother who was raising me at the time. When I first described my identity, I described it as being bisexual was just a layer on my cake. It wasn't the icing overall. The icing overall was how fabulous I am and how gorgeous I am. But for me, I didn't want it to be the sum of who I was. And I think that when we're telling stories about people, as Michelle said, we have to make sure that they are whole humans, first of all. And I always go back to the big question when I'm telling musicals or when I'm developing musicals. The very first question we always ask ourselves is, what does the character want? And it can't be on the basis of their identity, but in life, what do they want? What are their aspirations? What are their goals? What do they want to accomplish? Because every human, no matter how they identify or what they've experienced, does ultimately want something. And then we can start to tell their story through their identity. And then when it comes to speaking to writers specifically, I love telling writers as a director, I don't ask them as much as tell them to allow that character to speak for themselves versus having everyone else around them tell the audience who they are.
Agreed.
Christine here. First of all, I think something incredibly important is considerate, careful breakdown and character creation, right? That's just keeping my kind of garden tidy here in casting. And that is a real conversation, obviously, between writer, director, and casting. That is often casting is getting is in the middle of a conversation, right? It's in kind of mid pre-pro is when casting comes on, but we still are gatekeepers and we still have a lot of ability to bring a lot of different types of talent into the space. And I know that there are writers, directors, and casting in this space right now, and just always having that the gates, because I'm queer, I'm an immigrant, but I pass for a lot of other things, right? And a lot of people make assumptions about me without knowing me fully, and I have a lot of privilege, and it's interesting to hear what people say and react when they don't know things about you. But that's another conversation for another day. But when it comes to kind of the casting room that you can create before you get there and when you are in the space, it is really asking yourself at that start of the day, at that start of the casting process, who is in the room and who is not, and who should be part of this conversation and who isn't available to be here. Because when I say not available, I mean hasn't made it into this space, because we all bring unconscious bias into the space, right? We all do our best to, hopefully people have done their work to figure out how they unpack that for themselves, and push it away when they're working on stuff. But you've got to do it at the start of the day, and you've got to do it at the very end of the day when you are looking at those headshot resumes and you're putting together a cast and you're saying no to people for certain reasons. And I think that it is the two pillars, it's two posts. There's many things in between, right? And there's things before, but those are two essential parts of the work that we need to be very careful about in the casting space.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Michelle Mary. What I was going to add an addendum, Christine talked about it a little bit, but as you're getting to understand, I'm like, let's do more, right? So we're talking about the story. The story isn't just the script. The story is everyone who is going to touch a particular piece of artwork. That's the story. So if we're just looking at it in that framework, that does put a lot of hard work on the casting team, right? It puts a lot of pressure on the actors. If we're not thinking about the production team, if we're not thinking about our donors, if we're making a story, we're telling stories about folks who are not in the room, why are they not in the room? You can be hard of hearing and deaf and be a scenic designer. You can be trans, right? And you can be a dramaturg. Because we're people, and we are, as the chat has been saying, we are multifaceted. We come with a lot of magic on our plates. So the story isn't just the script. The story extends beyond. Everyone who is going to touch that piece of magic is the story. So it needs to be as vast and as diverse as the world that you are trying to tell.
I love that, T.S. Thank you. I also want to add on top of that, that I think there's a balance to be struck that people miss a lot between everything about this character is about their identity and we're going to ignore this person's identity altogether. And by ignore, what we really mean is cast them as the default and have them act like they're straight, white, and cis, right? It's, I think, one of the biggest things that theaters can do to support actors in the way that you were saying, Kevin, who are playing roles that maybe aren't specific to their identity, is just to make sure that the show is acknowledging who's in that role. Right, that we are acknowledging if something is said that's going to land differently because of who an actor is that's playing the role, we can't just go on as if that didn't happen, as if they are straight, white, and cis or whatever. But also, it shouldn't be all about that either. There's a balance to be struck there that's just finding the depth and humanity of everyone, right? We're not oversimplified in any given direction. Nobody is.
Yes, Emily. Okay, I have read as much as I can read in the chat and all the questions that have come in. And there are a lot of questions around authentic representation, both from actors and people casting. So the two sides are really about, how do I put that out there as a casting director to make sure that I am reaching this community, that I am casting authentically, that I am using language that I can use, that I'm not outing people, on and on and on. And then from an actor's perspective, Charlie, there's been a lot of follow-up questions around the disclosure, non-disclosure resumes, the dual resumes, and how you do that, where you share those, and just also navigating sort of those breakdowns and being able to figure out where you can really be your authentic self, what you can look for, what you can ask for. Anyway, it's a lot of thoughts there, but it's all around sort of that authentic representation within that casting process on both sides.
Hi, Charlie. If I may directly address the idea of the disclosure versus the non-disclosure resume, what I think might be the most practical and the most safe and the most private is have your traditional Backstage resume focus as a non-disclosure resume, particularly if you are going out for commercials or just generals. And if you feel comfortable, if you feel safe, when there are roles that speak to you that reflect part of your identity, that these are stories that you want to tell, or if a production of a Shakespeare play just says, we're looking, open genders, open everything, no rules. If you feel safe, please, in the email or whatever you send to the casting and directing team, tell us a little about yourself. We read all of those emails. You think we don't? I promise you, we are reading all of those emails. If you write any of us a note on Backstage or Actors Access, we are reading those. And I can tell you personally, I am reading every note. I am combing through it, looking for the answer to a problem that I'm trying to solve, essentially, and hoping that you're going to be the person who does it. When it comes to directors looking for trans actors and language, this is when it truly helps to hire any of the wonderful people on this panel, where we can all have an open and honest discussion about what exactly you're looking for. I have worked with wonderful, wonderful, well-meaning people that, just because they are not TGNC, are not necessarily tapped into certain terms that people who are in the community would be. And that is, we don't expect you to have all the answers. We don't expect you to be perfect or not step on anyone's toes. But we also expect you to act like you're not an expert and ask for help. And we are happy to provide it. Most of the work that I get, in all honesty, is what I call sort of like emergency casting. Is we wanted to do the big trans play, but the one trans actor that we knew is now busy, so now we're having a panic attack. Charlie, can you make magic in 2 weeks? And I want to, and I will, and we're going to have a lot of fun. But this sure would have been nice if we had all just maybe a month ago had a conversation, so this could be more reasonable and practical and grounded, and we can make this work. We can tell whatever story we all want to tell. We can tell stories authentically, and we can be nice to people while we do it. Just have to communicate.
I just want to add one tiny thing from a casting perspective. Also, Christine, sorry here, that Charlie was saying, people will often seek out someone like Charlie or Josie or Miss Hazel in particular when they're working on certain things. And so sharing your information, sharing your true self with people in the community, because we're the first people that people turn to. The amount of times I get phone calls about this, that, or the other, but it's always something to do with my identity that people closely associate. So I think that really finding your tribe. There's a lot of people here that want to be supportive and will know what to do with being protective of your identity if you're in a place in your career where you want to be protected.
Charlie, may I ask you a question, playing devil's advocate for people who are in the audience? Say I have a character who has two different identities that are intersectional, and I have a performer who only fills one of those identities. Can I cast them in that role?
My honest opinion, no. I've been in a lot of situations where I've had to cast characters of multiple overlapping identities, and it is my responsibility, as the casting director's responsibility, to find the actor or actors that live in those communities, that tell those truths. Sometimes what happens is one of the identities will be like very much like, for me, I am a Sephardic Jew and I'm a trans man. Elliot Fletcher is a trans masculine actor who is Ashkenazi Jewish. I absolutely think Elliot Fletcher could audition for the role of Charlie Hano, because in that instance, if we're making a movie, who knows? Because I think in that instance, the character needs to be transmasculine. Absolutely, it is essential to the script. But because of genocide, there are just so few Sephardic descendants in the United States, we can absolutely have an Ashkenazi actor play this role. And I think there are, and the specificities of when that is appropriate is very project to project and what the identities are and how we are talking about this. But responsible allyship is accessible and I believe is always doable.
Kevin, I just want to zoom out from that question, Miss Hazel, a little bit, because I think I have now said maybe once or twice, sort of flippantly throughout this panel, like, we all know, like, we should cast queer and trans folk in queer and trans roles, disabled folk in roles featuring disabilities. Let's talk about why, though. Because for those watching, we obviously, we're seeing more producers, casting directors, folks knowing that that's something perhaps that they should do to check a box, perhaps. But I would love for people watching today to understand why, especially for when they might want to advocate for people in positions of power, to folks in power who may not understand that that is a necessity. Let's empower these folks by saying why that is such an important thing to do, as opposed to just something that we know we should.
Yeah, I'd love to feel this. I think in my mind, there are three big reasons, and they are not the only three reasons, but they're the three big ones. One is when we talk about authentic representation, right? We live in a world where there is a default. The default is to be in a society where there is a default. And the default is that we expect people to be white, we expect them to be male, we expect them to be straight, we expect them to be cisgender, we expect them to be able-bodied, etc. When you are portraying a character who differs from any of those, you are portraying a character who has had very little authentic representation. And what that means is that somebody who's not a part of that group is not able to fully understand what it is like to be in that person's shoes, right? Like, if I watch a cis actor trying to play a trans role, I can tell, like, it's not hard, because what they're really doing is playing their ideas of what trans is, and right, and like, trans stories have been written by cis people throughout all of history. So if someone isn't really close to the trans community, they're not going to know the difference between, like, this is my idea of what trans people are versus, like, this is actual real life. So that's one reason. Another reason is that because of the problems we were saying earlier, that's also, sorry, I should also just add, that's also the reason that it's okay to cast trans actors in cis roles, but not cis actors in trans roles, right? Because I promise trans people know what it's like to be cis in the world. We see it all around us all the time. And that goes for every marginalized group. The second part is that casting rarely happens. And so if you have a trans role and you're handing it to cis actors, then trans folks aren't generally being cast anywhere. The Actors Equity Diversity report that came out last year, I think it was like 2016 to 2019, the number of roles that went to a trans actor out of like 100,000 or something was like 80. Right, it was like tiny percentage, like way smaller than the percentage of trans people in the world. So if you take away those roles that are specific for us, that's not okay. And then the other reason is that it can undermine the reality of what it means to be that identity. And what I mean by that is this is maybe a little more specific to trans folks, but for example, a lot of times what producers will do if they have to cast a trans woman is cast a cis man to play the role. And what that does is really freaking dangerous, which is it sends the message that trans women aren't really women, they're really men in drag. And those are the messages that when people internalize those are the messages that get trans women killed, right? So it's really important for that reason too. And again, there are lots more reasons, but to me, those are the three big ones.
I also want to jump in. One of the reasons why we cast authentically, for example, queer people in queer roles, trans people in trans roles, is actually for something that I just recently experienced. I was in rehearsal for the regulars with a queer woman, but I also had a straight understudy for them, which is also a problem. And as I was working with this straight understudy, I was realizing that the nuances of being queer, they weren't able to understand, that I was able to explore with the queer woman who was leading the role. For example, queer anger can be perceived in two different ways. Sometimes we can be a bit more compassionate and pull back on that, and only we know how to experience that because we've been through it, or we can go full on anger. And the way that it's perceived by other people is different if we're performing our own roles and our own identities versus someone else portraying them.
Charlie, everyone has said this and everyone has been so fantastically eloquent. But here's just something I did a little bit of research on in preparation for this panel, because recently I observed, as a lot of us have, a Facebook or an online argument about why can queer and trans actors play cishet roles, but why is it morally wrong if it's the other way around? And something that I did the research on, every single gay or trans marketed movie for the past 10 years that's been nominated for an Oscar has starred cishet people. Every single one of them without fail. The closest we got was in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Taylor Page is in that. We had Troye Sivan playing a minor character in Boy Erased. There's also there are no openly gay American movie stars. You can be an openly gay or trans television star, but the second you come out as gay in the entertainment industry, you can only be in television shows. I don't know why that happens, but that has happened to very, very famous people. That happened to Zachary Quinto, that happened to Elliot Page back in the day, and it happens constantly. There's just this strange ceiling that we're all banging our heads against, and it's something that is created. It's not inherent, it's created, and we can all work around it if we want to.
Absolutely. If I can respond to that, something that I noticed recently is that we as a culture, as a society in America specifically, we applaud straight cis men for doing things that queer people, in a sense, get punished for. And I think the way that I perceive that sometimes is that it's the culture at large telling queer people that you're only allowed to be a certain way if we give you permission to perform that way in your life. Meaning you're only allowed to be flamboyant if I tell you you can be, if I hire you to be in a skirt. But if you do that in regular life, then it's not acceptable. And I think we as a culture, and even stepping back, we as an entertainment industry taught the world that, and we need to unteach the world that. We as a queer community and entertainment, the drag culture taught the world to be transphobic. So we as an industry have a responsibility to unteach transphobia, period.
Thank you, Kevin. You all make such incredible points. And I think it also relates back to what TS was also saying a little earlier, is that a lot of this feels the result of often where money is directed in many ways. And often we see, and to Charlie's point as well, straight cis people quite literally profiting off of the trafficking of queer narratives. And whereas, and what Ms. Hazel said, often in narratives in which we're seeing those queer people relive, these queer characters relive trauma, right? It only stands to reason that queer, trans folks, marginalized people should be on the receiving end of any profit that is garnered from the trafficking of their own stories. I know we have very limited time left. Emily, do we want to transition into anything else?
I know we need like 8 more days, so I don't quite know where to wrap it up.
Let's just do it again, right? I can say that as part of Backstage. I'd love to do this again. I'd love to continue this conversation.
Thank you, Christine. I think it would be lovely to have maybe a closing thought from each panelist. I am going to put in the chat for everybody the resource, one of thousands of resources that Ring of Keys has developed, which is a directory that we are a part of, and some resources that we will continue to add to. And anyone else who wants to drop some resources in the chat, we can also do that during this. Okay to pass it around, maybe one thought as you're leaving this conversation today, or a next step for folks as they continue doing this work.
We want to start with Christine.
Yeah, sure. Let's, for my casting folks, you know, we're all in the process of learning and unlearning things, and there's a lot of things to confront in our own processes. And of course, we've talked about break time today. We understand that we want to be inclusive. Every casting person I know wants to be inclusive, but we've got to confront our unconscious educational bias that we have, our ability bias that we have. You know, we have to really go into the communities and find people because they're there, and we have to make sure that our decision-making process is as inclusive as possible. And also, let's fix the broken internship system for casting, which means people are doing unpaid internships. That's something that is a funnel. That means that we can't get more diverse voices into the space because not everyone can afford to do things for free. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Christine. TS.
Firstly, I want to thank everyone on this panel. Thank you for like the vibrant attendees, like pure magic right there, helping each other out along the way, hitting them with language. Love it. What I would like to lead you all with something that I pointed out earlier, but I really want to make sure that it was clear. The story extends beyond the script. The story extends beyond the script. There should be magic in the room. 360 holistic, authentic magic, not just check boxes of people. So you feel good during Black History Month, and in June when it's Pride Month, you got your little queer play going on, you know what I mean? Like, it should be 360 authenticness beyond the script.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh God, you are the master of a Zoom box, let me tell you. Michelle.
I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity, everyone who's here at this space, to be so transparent and so vulnerable, to be able to learn and to grow. There's so much that we can do. If you all have any questions in relation to deafness, please contact me or queer, the other panelists who are also trans, non-binary. I want to thank you so very much. It's not often that we're able to have this healthy dialogue. So thank you, everyone in attendance, and my heart is filled with warmth. Thank you.
I love everything that's been said. I will second it, and I will provide 2 resources who are actually human beings. I will provide myself as a resource if you're looking for a director to tell diverse stories, and I'll provide Charlie as a resource as a casting director if you're looking to tell diverse stories.
Wonderful. Charlie.
Hi, folks. I feel exceptionally privileged to be in this space, particularly as someone who at least intellectually is a white man. we'll see about the legal parts, right? I would really like to make a message, say to actors, art should not hurt you. Making art should not hurt you. If you were told to suffer for your art in college, you were lied to, and I'm so, so sorry. This should be joyful, and I hope you always protect yourselves in the creation of what you do.
Josie?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to echo everybody's thanks. This has been such a great group to chat with. Both last week when we were prepping this and today, I'm just like, I want to be everyone's best friend. I think the parting thought I will leave with is just a reflection on humility and just the importance of all of us recognizing what we don't know and recognizing when we need help to fill in the gaps of what we don't know, and recognizing like when stories are and aren't ours to tell. Because that's something we don't see enough of in the theater world. I was going to mention earlier that I don't give feedback on casting notices anymore, because if a show doesn't have the people behind it to write those casting notices appropriately, I want those red flags in there so that actors aren't signing up for a place where they're going to be hurt, as Charlie was saying. So no, I don't give feedback or just like specific tips on how to write casting notices. I tell people to hire folks on their team and make sure they're included who can help them with that. So.
Wonderful, thank you. And Sushma?
Yeah, I just feel so grateful. Like, as somebody who feels like such a baby, like I like my career is like still relatively new, and like I'm about to graduate college. Like I'm so grateful to everybody in this room who has done the work thus far to help make theater and like any forms of art like a safer space for people like us. Like I'm so privileged in that like I've been able to make majorly queer theater, and all of my professional experiences in those experiences have been so positive and like not traumatizing. And I think that it's because of all the work that y'all have done thus far, and people in the chat as well who are also, you know, involved in the community. So I'm just full with gratitude right now. So I just want to say thank you.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Emily?
All right, yeah, sure. I mean, many. One, I think, you know, I urge all the people who came today to get answers to just stay in a place of learning and not solving. You know, be in a place of asking, be in a place of hiring, probably. I think the other thing, just listening to you all, is the quick story, and Sushma was in this room, and Molly, if they're still in the chat. Yeah, I was involved in the first production at Actors Theater to not have any cis men involved. And I remember a staff member, a white cis man staff saying, oh, it must be nice not to have that perspective in the room. And I said, the perspective is still in the room. And that is one of the reasons we are all within the dominant culture. And that is one of the reasons when we talk about authentic casting, that it is important to honor that. That is a perspective that we all embody and have. And if we are in an industry that is going to survive a pandemic and learn how to reopen and do everything that we've been able to do, we sure as hell better be able to get this type of room showing up in more places. Kevin?
Oh God, I love you. All of that. I want to express my gratitude to all the panelists. It has been such a gift to meet many of you in this way, and thank you to all the attendees. And I reiterating what some other folks have shared is that, and to everyone watching, we should never be asked to put someone else's artistic vision before our own personhood. And I think often folks of marginalized identities and experiences are asked to do that. And to reiterate, another thing that's been said is that think about us, think about these spaces, this space that we've created and curated, and how it can exist in your stories in a way that the dominant culture may not say it actually calls for it. Like this is a snapshot of a world that can be created, regardless of whether it's centering queerness, transness, disability, what have you, right? Call us in, invite us to your table, and then make sure the table has been set for us. Don't just offer a seat. It's rude to not actually prepare a space in which we can thrive once you've invited to those spaces. And I encourage you also to check out the thread that Miss Hazel was posting. Those were incredible questions. And remember, we want to create art, and I think often maybe we think of marketability and capitalism before we think of the art that we're creating. And that gets in the way of bringing spaces like this to the table as well. So thank you again. And thank you Backstage, a Ring of Keys. And all of you. What a wonderful way. Wow, an hour and a half really flew by. I'm a living resource. My name is, I feel like we could go around one more time and just say our names where people might be able to find us. Great. I'm Kevin Kantor. My name there is where I'm available at all social media handles. I'm an actor, I'm a writer, an editorialist. Find me.
Hi, Emily. All of my social media handles start with ET and then cute things because I made them when I was much younger and thought it was fun. And I work at Actors Theater of Louisville. You can certainly find me that way. Christine.
You caught me mid-typing. At McKenna-Tirella and at Backstage Cast.
TS.
Hello, TS Hawkins, they, them, there. I will put my email in the chat and my team will definitely make sure that you get directly in touch with me. And yeah, let me be a resource for each and every one of you. We got you. Let us hold you. Pass it to Michelle.
Hello. As was mentioned by TS, I'm Michelle Mary Schaefer. I also have a website, Instagram, Twitter. So you can go ahead and search my name, of course, put in my name, and we'll definitely be able to connect. And I can't wait to connect with each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And I'll popcorn it to whoever.
My name is Miss Hazel Jade. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, I guess, at Miss Hazel Jade. And you can email me at hazel@jadeanthony.com. Thank you.
I can go. Josephine Kearns, she, her, and I dropped my info in the chat, but josephinekearns.com is the easiest way to contact me. Sushma.
Yeah, again, I'm Sushma Saha, using pronouns. I guess for me, I put my Instagram in the chat, but I can also put my email in case anybody want to reach out to me as a resource. But yeah, my Instagram is Sushma Saha, if that's helpful. And putting my email, sushma.saha98@gmail.com.
Hi, folks. Charlie Hano, available for all of your casting and consulting needs. My website is hanocasting.org, and my email is hanocasting@gmail.com. I'm going to drop that in the chat. Please reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I know before we officially log off, there was questions about the chat being saved and or this being recorded and where it might be available. Christine, could you speak to that briefly?
Yeah, I'll make sure that the chat is saved as a resource. We might turn that into editorial if it's, we'll get permission. And then at some stage, I'll chat to all these panelists, and we'll have an edited version of this available.
Wonderful.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Wow.
And to our interpreters too.
Yes. Thank you to our interpreters.
Thank you.
The interpreters are the bomb.
Candace,
Yes.
.com. What?
And aren't they gorgeous? My God.
Word. I was like, yes, I'm understanding everything. This is great. I loved it. Y'all are great.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.